Hello everyone, Star here, and welcome to my video on modding weapons in the current meta of Warframe. The meta has changed since the 5 years I've been playing, and now the meta may change a bit with the new Damage 3.0 coming out. I'll go over the basics quickly because we got a lot to talk about. Basically, you match the symbols on the top right of each mod, called the polarity, to the top right of the slot you put the mod into, and you'll get a reduced mod count. You can equip stances on melee mods to add more mod count, like an aura on a Warframe. You can format each weapon to add or change an already existing mod polarity to match your specific builds. When you get into the late game, you will need forma. A lot of forma. Let's start with the general rule of modding most weapons. You will always want to have added damage mods and multi-shot mods. That's a given. Next is usually where you have the fork in the road. You either choose a crit build or a status build. This will be easy by looking at the weapon's base stats. Here you'll be looking at the crit chance and status chance. Here's a good example with the Soma Prime. This weapon's crit chance is base 30%, which is really good for auto weapons. With a 3 times crit chance multiplier is even better. That means each crit does 3 times the damage. The status is naturally low for the weapon because it's a primarily crit based weapon. For other weapons like the Grineer or melee weapons, you should focus on status. There's also the percentages that you should be looking at. For crit and status, you generally want to be looking at the 20 to 30ish range. If it's lower than that, I don't recommend building for that type. Here, for status, I'm using my Torpedo Prime build. This build has a lot of status. This is good because the high slash proc. I'm using a viral instead of corrosive due to the meta change from damage 2.5. Even though the base stats for crit chance and status chance are the same, the crit multiplier is where it hinders the critical potential. You can still go for a crit build, but you will still need more mods to make up for the multiplier. Another thing to always take into account is some of the weapon's special quirks. Like with the Opticore, the firing on it is very fast. You can choose to slow down the charge and give it extra damage to make it more efficient, or any other weapon that this can apply to in a similar but different way. Now I'll talk about the way to make any melee weapon basically a crit based weapon that does a ton of damage in the current meta. Basically use Organ Shatter and True Steel, both crit based mods, with Berserker and Blood Rush on any build, and it's magically a crit build with extra slots for damage, range, and other mods. For primarily shooting weapons, you can just use a bunch of crit based weapons. There really aren't that many that are too good. Argon Scope isn't really the best, so you don't have to have that if there's builds out there for it. Unless you're using a sniper in an Eidolon build, then it's kind of necessary. There's also the highly acclaimed Memeing Strike that basically adds a bunch of crit chance for every time you slide, and that's why people just spin around in circles when they hit their melee. I generally use it for builds, but this isn't really necessary for all builds, just like the Argon Scope. And it may get nerfed to all hell in the next damage update, so I'd recommend for builds that do use it just to use another crit mod if you don't have it. Instead, it should be good, maybe not better, but you have to work with what you got. For status, this is really easy. You can already have damage mods, multi-shot, and or firing rate mods on your weapon, and you can just add these on top. You can use dual stat mods, and I actually have a video on how to get the dual stat mods on my channel if you're interested. Basically, these mods just add elements to your build with extra status chance as well, making it a status build. Oh, and also don't forget to put on Conditional Overload and Drifting Contact if you want to make the elemental status build way better. Conditional Overload basically adds an extra amount of damage to a melee weapon, and Drifting Contact just adds a little bit extra status chance. But again, these mods are actually a little bit rare, so take that with a grain of salt. You can choose which element you're going for depending on which one you use, but generally for a rule of thumb, I'd recommend either using viral or generally viral. So to sum this up, for shooting weapons, primary and secondary, you can use damage-based mods, multi-shot / shooting rate, and status or crit, and also take into account the different quirks a weapon may have. For melee, use damage base, range sometimes, crit chance most of the time, and status when you can. Then you might be asking, where do Rivens come in? Don't worry, for Riven mods, you can put them into the slot where they have better stats than an already equipped mod. So if you're using a crit-based mod and swapping it with a crit-based Riven, you can swap them if the crit stat on the Riven is higher than the regular True Steel. If it isn't, then there really is no point on putting it on. If it adds some extra abilities you want on your weapon, then you just have to choose which mods are more important to keep. So that was my video on building weapons in Warframe in the new meta. I hope you enjoyed. If you did, please leave a like, subscribe, and ring that bell icon for more Warframe content. Feel free to leave any comments you have in the comment section below, and I'll get to you there. This has been Star, signing off, and I'll see you guys in the next video. Thank you.